that he's facing, including attempt to assassinate the president of the United States, as well as that new charge, that assault of a federal officer with a deadly weapon. Now, he didn't personally speak inside court. His lawyers entered his not guilty plea on his behalf. But this was his first appearance before the actual judge who's going to oversee his trial. That's Judge McFadden, who is a Trump appointee. Cole Allen walked into the courtroom. You see him in that orange jumpsuit. This time was the first time that he was actually shackled, both around his waist and around his wrist. And the courtroom was silent when he walked in, but you could hear that noise of the shackles as he walked in and eventually took his seat. When he entered his plea, he was actually standing at the lectern, flanked by his lawyers and a U.S. Marshal behind him. Again, he did not speak. His lawyers entered that not guilty plea on his behalf. As far as where this case goes from here, we didn't get any new intel on any other motions that the defense intends to file, any of those pretrial motions, but we did start to discuss in a preliminary way the motion that they filed last week that gained a bit of attention. They're moving to have both U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche disqualified from the prosecution of this case, which would be an extremely unlikely step, but a big deal. And so the judge asked some preliminary questions about that and where we stand and ordered some briefing to figure out where this goes. But what was really interesting about that is that they're indicating that they're not moving to have all of Todd Blanche's deputies removed from this case, which would be the entire Department of Justice, but they do want the entirety of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office removed. So not just Jeanine Pirro, but all of these other prosecutors who are working on this case under her. And that is because they are saying that she has been portraying herself as a victim of this alleged crime. She was, both she and Todd Blanche were, of course, in attendance at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And they're saying between that attendance and the public statements that they've made, they could be victims and are not able to be impartial. But again, there's briefing on that. And our next court date here is June 29th. Ariel?
Fallon, thank you so much for that thorough reporting. Catherine, is there an argument to be made that Jeanine Pirro and Todd Blanche are too close to this? Is that a salient argument in court?
It's an argument, but it's a losing argument. The facts are Mr. Allen, never made it into the ballroom. So the material witnesses are the law enforcement that stopped him. There was no Pirro, Blanche, Kash Patel didn't interact with him in any way. They're not listed as victims in the charges against them. So there really is no actual conflict of interest.
So Pirro has been very public about this case. She's talked about being in the, quote, combat zone, posting on social media about Allen's jail conditions. Does that actually strengthen the defense's legal argument at some point?
It gives them more. I mean, she should probably not speak about the case. The prosecutor should just speak into the courtroom. So it gives them a little bit of oomph to their argument, but it really is a losing argument because, again, he never made it into that ballroom, and they are not listed as victims in the charges.
Breaking news, the man accused of trying to assassinate President Trump during last month's White House Correspondents' Dinner was just arraigned in federal court. 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen now formally faces charges of attempted assassination of the president, discharging a firearm during a crime of violence, transporting a gun across state lines to commit a crime, and assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon. Let's go live now to CNN Chief Legal Affairs Correspondent Paula Reed right outside the courthouse here in Washington. What more are you learning this morning, Paula?
That's right. So Allen pleaded not guilty to the 4 charges he is facing after he allegedly attempted to assassinate President Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. This is significant because this is the first time Allen has formally responded to the charges that have been filed against him. This was an arraignment, so it was a pretty quick hearing, straightforward. They read the charges, informed him of his rights. He entered his plea. But then the judge wanted to pivot to another big question that is looming over this case, and that is whether top Justice Department officials who are at the White House Correspondents' Dinner can continue to oversee this matter. Defense attorneys for Allen are arguing that the U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, and the Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche should be removed from the case because they argue they are victims of this alleged crime. Now, the judge was pretty skeptical of this argument, noting that what happened with Allen happened outside the ballroom. These officials would not have actually been witnesses or seen anything. But he invited the defense lawyers to submit additional details about exactly what they're thinking. But I can say that Blanche and Piero are highly unlikely to step aside from this case. One of the most high-profile matters they are dealing with right now at the Justice Department. They're also both up for promotions. Todd Blanche effectively auditioning for the job of Attorney General, something he is widely considered and expected to get tapped to be permanently. And then Piero has also been discussed as someone who might be getting a promotion. So neither one of them is going to step aside from this case, which at its core is about an attempt to allegedly kill their boss.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. The judge wants to talk about why he was held under suicide watch for several days. And, you know, we have to add a little bit of nuance here. It was basically for almost a week. It was either suicide watch, which is the most restrictive. So you're held in a padded cell. You have a vest on. That's almost like a straitjacket. That's according to his defense team. And you have no opportunity to use a jailhouse tablet to communicate with other people. Our viewers might be a little bit surprised to hear that, but that is an option for a lot of incarcerated people. So he did not have any of those. So there were suicide precautions, and then there was suicide watch, which is the most restrictive. And what his lawyers essentially argued in a filing, I have it right here on Saturday, is that those precautions violated his rights. He couldn't leave the cell without an escort. He had to be strip searched. He had to have somebody watch him as he showered. So all of this is laid out in this motion. And then his defense team seemed to sort of sort it out with the Department of Corrections. And they actually early this morning filed a motion to vacate this hearing. Hey, we don't need this hearing. But guess what? The judge said, no, we are going to have this hearing. And I'm calling a representative of the Department of Corrections to be at this hearing to explain the conditions of his confinement. So it sounds like the judge is not happy to see that there were days of these precautions. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in court.
And I'm curious, did the judge or even someone from the state, did they talk at all about why he was placed on suicide watch in the first place? Was he suicidal? Do we know that information?
Well, we haven't heard their side of the story. Of course, prosecutors did lay out this case, this timeline of 3 weeks of planning, Googling the White House Correspondents' Dinner, taking a train across the country. But no, they never discussed being on suicide watch. But what the defense team says is that a nurse who did the evaluation, he was evaluated on Saturday night, on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday. Again, there was a check-in on Friday. And the nurse even said there is no risk of suicide. So they're wondering why. Now, what the Department of Corrections might say, and I expect they might say this in court in just a few minutes, is that it was for his own protection. He'd never been incarcerated. If you were to have him share a cell, maybe that was unsafe for him. I don't know what they're going to say, but clearly the judge is confused and potentially not happy. That's the tone that I get when I'm reading through that docket.
Okay, well, no, you'll be watching that hearing for us today and give us some update when it's available.
Absolutely.
Anna Schechter, as always, thank you so much.
That we will likely see many more charges to come. At this point, though, we have very little information about what federal investigators know and how they're painting the picture of these charges. We know that one case was filed in D.C. federal court overnight, one criminal case, but that case is filed under seal. So we would imagine that it was probably a case involving Allen, this suspect who we have here at this point, but it's filed under seal. So we don't know his name. I would imagine that no other cases were filed overnight, but it's Sunday now. So they'll continue to investigate this. They'll likely add more charges. But what's really important here is that at this point, anything that would be filed in federal court is just a criminal complaint. So they'll eventually seat a grand jury and produce some sort of an indictment, presumably towards the suspect. But the other big thing that we learned from Judge Janine